Welcome to another edition of the Gentle Musings of an Elven Scholar. Today I'm going to be talking about a topic that is a little bit more controversial amongst a lot of the Tolkien enthusiasts and about their interpretation of Tolkien's words about elven culture and elven origins and all. I got to thinking about it years ago that about where elves came from, where men came from, where orcs came from. So quite a number of years ago I wrote a white paper on this and submitted it to some other Tolkienites that follow Tolkien's beliefs as well, and the reception was mixed. Some people liked it, a lot didn't, because they wanted to believe exactly the words as they were written down by Tolkien. And even Tolkien himself stated, and I think as I said in previous episodes, please be careful on interpreting the writings because in the way Tolkien wrote it, the information we have on elven lore comes from the elven individuals passing it on to men who then went and actually wrote it down. And so, and you know the old story that I remember we did this in class one time, we had a whole bunch of us as children sitting in a circle, and the teacher came up and whispered something in one of our ears, and then we were to whisper in the next ear and the next ear until it went all the way around, and by the time it got back to the original, and that person said what the original message was, it actually had changed just in just a few minutes, just amongst 10-15 people. It had already altered by the time it got there. So that's where we have to be careful. What I believe we're supposed to do with the words of Tolkien is to look at the spirit of the word, not so much necessarily the letter of the law, as some might say, but it's the spirit, what the intent was. So again, the original Elven scholars passed it on to men. Men then passed it on to others who eventually wrote it down, and then over the thousands of years, we can see what has happened. So again, my goal here with these videos is to, as we discussed before, to help with the reawakening of the elven soul within you. And with that, we have to do it from the point of light, not so much from the letter of the law, but from the spirit. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, are what I believe is the actual origin of man, and that it comes from elves and not as a separate race. And again, Tolkien alludes to this many times, and we're actually going to go over this today and find out why men are really elves forgotten, and that we can return back and reawaken. And one of the best ways to reawaken your elven self is to realize that is what you are. It's just been forgotten. So I'm going to give you some Tolkien proof on where we actually come from, that we are actually elves, only forgotten. All right, so let's go over the history. I know that a lot of people are going to say, well, Tolkien said that men and elves, men are the followers. Elves the firstborn, and then men are the followers. Elves firstborn, men followers. All right, but there's a reason men are followers, just like the orcs were also followers. In other words, any race that came after were considered the followers. And they went on to say how Tolkien stated that men were only here for a short while, and that they were given the gift of death. All right, there was a reason for this. Could people say, well, then that shows they're a totally separate race? But that's actually not, I believe, what was intended there. You have to look at Tolkien, his history, what he believed in, and how he wrote things as how they were interpreted, the stories over thousands of years. Men came later because men came from elves. Men were given the gift of death because it was actually something, I guess you could look at it and say that it was a gift of mercy. Men have a tendency, the race of man, so to speak, has a tendency to continually err and not want to learn. Hence the reason the world is the way it is. Well, we certainly would not want those kind of people necessarily living forever, continuing the same damage over and over again. So they have a short life, hoping that they will figure things out life after life over and over again, because Tolkien did discuss in detail reincarnation. What better gift than to say, I'm not going to punish you for one life of mistakes, but I'm going to give you one chance after another to eventually figure it out, to figure out what your mistakes were, but I'm not going to let you continue to stay on this earth and damage it within one life. The gift of death. All right, so let's go ahead and find out what proof Tolkien gives that we are elves, that men are elves. They're just forgotten. All right. All right, so again, I originally wrote a small paper titled The Nature of the Soul, in which I presented the idea of the connection between elves, men, and orcs as a single race, or as a de-evolution of the soul. Originally you had elves who then de-evolved into men and orcs. All right, so within this video we're going to talk about that, and I'm going to give you some proof on it. All right, the purpose of the video is to present the concept that the original and sole race of speaking humanoids on this world were the elves, and all other races, men and orcs, came from them through a process of de-evolution of the soul through Arda Mard. Arda being all the world, Mard meaning that the original intent of what this world was to be did not happen. And that's why we're hoping one day for Arda healed, where the world will be healed again. And that's part of the reasons why I'm doing these videos, to help encourage the healing of the world. And what better way than to remember who we are, so that we can start doing what we were originally meant to do. And that was to be healers and co-creators with this world, to be the stewards of the world. Okay, so Arda Mard. I'll attempt to present evidence which shows a clear and documented path of the corruption of the elvish soul through the influences of the Morgoth. And for those who don't know, you can, looking at it from a Christian point of view, the original devil. He was the greatest of all the angels of the Valar, and became corrupted from his own intent, from his own desires. Very similar to the fall of the devil, so to speak. All right, so we're going to go into this corruption, which will be covered in greater detail, led to the rise or fall, so to speak, of man and orcs. I'll also, towards the end of this video, present a ray of hope, where we can return, we can remember who we are, and we can return back to our original state. All right, so let's get started. All right, as told in the tales, the first children, okay, or the elves, made their appearance along the shores of Mae'govannen, all right, the lake where all the elves originally woke up. Okay, it was after that time that the Morgoth already had his stronghold in the north, and through his malice had caused the marring of Arda. In other words, taking the world away from the original intent that Eru, God, had for it. Okay, all right. The young elves, while not understanding, were aware of his presence, all right, and fear became known to them. Therefore, by the time Orome, one of the Valar, came and actually found them, they were already wary of strangers. They were already, and that was part of the original intent. For those who have read the Silmarillion, you can see in there that the Morgoth really intended this, to have them so afraid of others that they would not be willing to respond to the message that the Valar were trying to bring them. All right. All right. It was at this time when Orome showed up, because they were already afraid, that when Orome showed up, that the original elves, some of them, ran in fear to the forest, never to be seen again. So remember, some of them ran and left and ran into the forest and were never seen again. More were left behind when the great march to the west occurred, when Orome said, let's go home, let's go to Valinor. All right, and even then, some stayed behind. And these became known as the Avari, or the Dark Elves. So you have those that remained behind and those that ran into the forest and were never seen again. At least so we thought. Okay, after this occurred, an immense period of time passed. We're talking hundreds of thousands, it could have been millions of years. It's hard to say how the Silmarillion dated such time before the sun and the moon. All right, so those that went west and those that remained behind, okay, branched far apart in both language and culture. So the elves that went west with the Valar, and those that remained behind, the Avari, so much time had passed that they literally became a different people, a different culture, different languages altogether. It was around this time that man first appeared. Okay, he too came from the far east, just like the original elves did, and had a language based in part on that of the Avari. All right, those are the forgotten east. So here we have where elves came about on Mae'govannen, and they became afraid of strangers, so to speak, because of the Morgoth. Then you had Orome show up, find them, and try to save them from the north, and said, let's go to Valinor, the land that was safe and evergreen. Some went, but some did not, and those that did not were the Avadi. Now, an immense period of time passes, and all of a sudden men show up, also in the Far East, who had a language very similar to the Avadi. Okay, all right. All right, it was also after much time had passed that the appearance of the race of the orcs came into the great tale. All right, it has been well documented and understood that they came as a corruption of the elves and possibly men. And we'll talk about that here in just a little bit. Tolkien out and out says that that was an absolute thing that happened with the orcs. Okay, so this is a basic description of the time of creation. All right, it is my premise here that the Avadi, through the relentless malice of the Morgoth, through corruption and torture and fear, because one of the most important things we can know about life is that life is a two-sided coin. And some people say, well, on one side it's love and on the other side is hate. It is not. One side is love and the other side is fear. From fear, all things negative occur. From fear of strangers comes hate. From fear of loss comes greed. And the list goes on and on. So it's love and fear. So on love side, we have the elves that went to Valinor. On the other side of the coin, fear, we have the Avadi, who lived in fear, and we know that fear corrupts, that fear causes damage to the body, and if you get enough people that way, you can literally come up with a whole new people. All right, so it is my premise that the Avadi, through the relentless malice of the Morgoth, through fear, torment, and despair, and we know that despair can definitely corrupt a soul, that the race of man came to be, and through further corruptions, finally, the race of orcs. All right, let's talk about the evidence, at least from the point of view of Tolkien. And again, remembering that these are tales that have been told and retold and retold and retold. And so what we have to do again is to look at the essence of the letter. All right, all right. Okay, one of the most common questions is asked about how an immortal race, such as the elves, could become mortal. Well, Tolkien talks about that in depth, and we have wonderful, wonderful proof from his writings. Again, it must first be understood that the definition of the word immortal is often most misunderstood. The elves were not per se immortal. All right. Okay, their lifespan was simply tied to that of Arda, or the earth. So as long as the earth was around, they were around. It sounds like that's immortal, but remember, they could still be slain. They could still die, so to speak. They live as long as Arda exists. All right. While they may not succumb to a physical illness, they can die from grief or wounds. Even in this case, they actually do not die. Their souls simply are allowed passage to the halls of Mandos, where, after a period of time, may elect to be reborn. Okay, as stated in the Legendarium, and we're going to be posting these up on the screen while I go ahead and talk about them. The destruction of the Hroa, which is the Elven word for body, causing death, or the unhousing of the Fea, which is the soul, was soon experienced by the immortal Eldar. So those that were supposed to be immortal already were experiencing death when they awoke in the marred and overshadowed realm of Arda. Indeed, in their earlier days, death came more readily, for their bodies were then less different than the bodies of men, and the command of their spirits over their bodies less complete. So as we can see, in the early days of the elves, their bodies were very similar to men. Again, one more possible proof that elves and men are really the same, just men have forgotten who they are. All right, and that, by the way, is in Morgoth's Ring, page 218. Okay, as can be seen from the above passage that we just talked about, the elves in the beginning were closer physically to man. Only those who went west into Valinor were able to more fully manifest their true potential. Again, those who stayed behind were a whole lot more like man, and yet they were elves, but they were more like man. Only those that went on to the land of light actually became, or were able to realize more of their full potential. Okay, and here, the next passage goes on to describe death as an unintended product of Ardamard. Okay, but herein there is indeed a difficulty that reveals to us that death is a thing unnatural. It may be amended, but it cannot, while Arda lasts, be wholly undone or made as if it had not been. So death was not the original intent. It became because the world itself was corrupted. All right. Then it goes on, death is indeed death, and within the great theme cometh the mar and is grievous. The mar being the Morgoth, the devil. Okay, here again we find that death in and of itself is a thing unnatural and would not exist were it not for the malevolent actions of the Morgoth. Okay, with this in mind, it can be easily ascertained that the original intent or design for Arda was a world without death. Alright, so if it wasn't meant to be a world without death, why would man have been created having the gift, so to speak, of death? Alright, okay. Alright, it is through the long and persistent actions of an evil intent that brought this state into being. We also find evidence that the Morgoth did indeed have the power to corrupt an individual enough to cause the loss of long life. So here we have elves that were granted an extremely long life and to be free of illness and sickness and such. This was granted to them by Eru, God, but even that gift can be lost if they are willing to succumb to the evil intent of another. All right. It does, however, seem best to view Melkor, who's also the Morgoth, corrupting power as always starting at least in the moral or theological level. In other words, what you believe. Any creature that took him for Lord, and especially those who blasphemously called him Father or Creator, became soon corrupted in all parts of its being. All right, the Fea, the spirit, dragging down the Throa, which is the body, in its descent into Morgothism, hate and destruction. As for elves being immortal, they in fact only had enormously long lives, and were themselves physically wearing out and suffering a slow, progressive weakening of their bodies. So again, it was simply by who they chose to accept as their Lord, who they chose to accept their beliefs. Okay, we know very well, and I've talked about it in medical videos before, psychoneural immunology. It's what we think. This is an actual medical fact. Neural immunology. It's how we think, how we feel can affect our brain, our immune system, our emotions, and of course, and this all affects our body. So what happens in the spirit first takes place later in the body. And if you choose to believe in illusion and evil, then that will then manifest over time in the body. Okay, all right. Okay, therefore, while it was the malice and evil of the Morgoth that created a world where death could occur, okay, it was through the actions of the individual, okay, or an accepting of an evil lifestyle, that the change in the soul could be manifest. Believe it first in the heart, it will come out in the body later. We know that simply in medicine. All right, there's a condition called broken heart syndrome. It's an actual medical condition. If the soul is sad and depressed long enough and in deep enough sorrow, it will actually cause the heart to enlarge. So what we feel, what we believe can be manifest in the body. Starts in the spirit, shows up in the body later. All right. Okay, one example of this occurred after the slaying of the kinsman in Valinor and was spoken of by Mandos. Since this fading is here quite explicitly the mode in which the doom of mortality that Mandos had spoken came upon them. The doom of mortality upon that which is supposed to be immortal. By their choices, by their thoughts, by their beliefs, they were able to become mortal. All it takes is what you believe. All right. Okay. Then also went on to say, a measure of mortality should visit them, the house of Feanor, and those who followed them, that they should be lightly slain with weapons or torment or sorrow. Whereas before, elves could not die that way. Now they could, by their choice. All right, here we have evidence that immortality can indeed be lost or faded, okay, due to the actions of the individual, should they follow a path laid out by the Morgoth. While the race itself may not lose its inherent qualities, the individual can, and if given enough time and enough people doing the same thing, all right, may indeed create a new race or species. We see that today. All right, one of the best ways you can know you're doing something wrong is if everyone else believes the same thing. You know, the old cliche goes, what the masses go for generally is not the right thing. All right, so If enough people believe in something, it can change a whole people. All right, so enough time, Chris. Okay, for this connection, I believe it was through the Avari, or those elves who remained behind in the far east, who walked the road down to mortality, and eventually to create the race of the Atani, or man. Okay, so this goes on into over tens and tens of thousands of years, the downward spiral. There is some evidence to the fact that the Avari, in particular, had problems with staying upon the elven path. An interesting comment was made by Tolkien in reference to the ability of the elves to choose their own path. Okay, he goes on to say, because also, as has been said, though all that die are summoned amandos, it is within the power of the Fear, or their spirits, of the elves to refuse the summons. And doubtless many, the most unhappy or most corrupted spirits, especially those of the Dark Elves, do refuse and so come to worse evil, or at best wander unhoused and unhealed without hope of return. Not so do they escape judgment forever, for Eru abideth in his overall. So again, by their choices, they can change their destiny, they can change what their future should have been, they can change the way they heal. But again, Eru is infinitely forgiving, and even those are given an opportunity to eventually to address and face what they did and eventually have the opportunity to be healed. Okay, all right. As evidenced by the possibility of a change in race to another, Tolkien gave us a picture of how it could be done, how one race could change into another. All right, one of the most documented transformations of elves to another race is that of the transition to orcs. All right, in numerous passages in the Legendarium, Tolkien shed some light on how this happened. In the book The Morghast Ring, we find, in the legends of the Elder Days, it is suggested that the Diablos subjugated and corrupted some of the earliest elves. Sound familiar? And he also said that the orcs are fundamentally a race of rational incarnate creatures. And we know that Morgoth could not create life, but he could corrupt it. So the orcs were living, thinking beings that were not created by Morgoth, but were basically another race that was corrupted into what they are. Okay, as that passage states, it demonstrates the Morgoth's ability to corrupt one race in order to create another. Okay, so now we have some documentation to show that. It even seems to point explicitly to the Avari, okay, the ones that were left behind or stayed behind, as a mention of the earliest elves. The following passage goes on to produce further evidence about the Avari being the root race of both men and orcs. Since Melkor could not create an independent species, life was not given to him, the ability to create life, but had immense powers of corruption and distortion of those who came into his power, it is probable that these orcs had a mixed origin. Most of them plainly and biologically were corruptions of elves, and probably later also of men, but also among them as special servants and spies of Melkor, and as leaders. Okay, there must have been numerous corrupted minor spirits who assumed similar bodily shapes. These would exhibit terrifying and demonic characters. So again, we have even Tolkien verifying that one race can transition to another given enough time, especially if they're willing to accept the illusion of hate and fear, which is what the Morgoth proposed. Okay. He now expressly asserts that the earlier view, that the orcs were in origin corrupted elves, but observed that later some were possibly also derived from men. Okay. He goes on again to say, hence orcs, part of the elf-man idea gone wrong. All right. Though as far as orcs, the Eldar believed Morgoth had actually bred them by capturing men and elves, early and increasing to the utmost any corrupt tendencies they possessed. Okay. Alrighty, so we have Tolkien talking about how one race can be translated into another, and we have that it points to the Avari who were left behind. Okay, now let's talk about some more evidence of a single one race. Okay, with the above passage in mind, I'll change tactics and show a closer relationship between elves and men. According to Tolkien, this relationship was closer than most would have suspected. From letters he wrote, it was stated that elves and man are actually the same race. Okay, in Morgoth's Ring, page 330. The existence of elves, that is, of a race of beings closely akin to men, so closely indeed that they must be regarded as physically and biologically simply branches of the same race. Okay, simply branches. Okay, he goes on to say, my father's draft letter, this is from Christopher, my father's draft letter of September 1954. Elves and men are evidently, in biological terms, one race, or they could not have bred and produced fertile offspring, even as a rare event. So we know that well from today, that two species, entirely different species, cannot successfully breed and produce offspring. You have to be of the same species or race in order for that to be. So we have Arwain, we have Luthien. They are offspring of men and elves. That could not have happened if we weren't essentially the same race. Okay, all right. Okay, at this point we now have an clear understanding of the relationship between elves and man as the same race or different branches of the same race. Okay, this is often seen in the animal kingdom where an original ancient bear gave rise to the various kinds alive today. Same species, different branches. All right, that's just evolution. We know that. Okay, now we have shown a biological link between elves and men. All right, and a possible point where they branched off with the Avari. Okay, but what about any historical or mythological evidence handed down by man? Okay, according to Tolkien, legends and myths survived amongst man and passed down to the elves in an oral tradition. All right, man as an immortal. Now, this is going to actually, according to Tolkien, these are now writings of men who have been passed down through the centuries. According to the myths passed down by the ancient Atani, man's original state was one graced with immortality. They perceived that in olden times they were gifted with long life, and only through the malice of the Morgoth their birthright was lost to them. Again, remember that in one way or another they gave up their birthright by willing to accept fear and such an illusion into their lives. Okay, all right. In all their descriptions, it sounds amazingly like the life of the early elves. This evidence was uncovered in a little-known work titled Athrabeth Finrad ad Andrath, okay, or The Debate of Finrad and Andrath. All right. In this work, it was written how a long discussion occurred between Finrad, an elf, and Andrath. Okay, she was a wise woman among the Atani. Okay, it was very rare for men to pass on their oral traditions to anyone who seemed outside of their race, but one evening she chose to reveal them to Finrad, and he was a dear, dear friend to man. The following passages bring to light the Atani's early beliefs. Okay. Now the Eldar learned that according to the lore of the Adain, again another group of men believed that their hroa, their bodies, were not by right nature short-lived, but had been made so by the malice of Melkor, or the Morgoth. Yet among my people, from wise unto wise, out of the darkness, comes the voice saying that men are not now as they were, not as their true nature was in their beginning, and as clear still is this said by the wise of the people of Marek, okay, who she belonged to, who have preserved in memory a name for him that ye call Eru, though in my folk he was almost forgotten. They had almost forgotten who God was. So I learned from Annel. They say plainly that men are not by nature short-lived, but have become so through the malice of the Lord of the darkness, whom they do not name. That I can well believe, said Finrad, that your bodies suffer in some measure of the malice of Melkor, for you live in Ardamart, okay, the world damaged, and as do we, and all the matter of Arda was tainted by him, before ye or we came forth and drew our Hroa and their substance thereof. all save only maybe Aman before he came there. For no, it is not otherwise with the Quindi themselves. Their health and stature is diminished. Already those of us who dwell in Middle-earth, and even we who have returned to it, find that the change in their bodies is swifter than in the beginning. And that, I judge, must forebode that they will prove less strong to last than they were designed to be, though this may not be clearly revealed from many long years. All right, so even Finrod could see that their bodies as elves were not what they used to be. So it is not a great leap to go that the Avari, through the corruption of Milkor, the Morgoth, through the acceptance of illusion and fear, that eventually, as their souls changed, their bodies reflected it the same. So, more proof for the race of man. All right. Okay, as it can be seen from that passage, the Atani, the men, once believed similar to the elves in Eru and such, but over the years, as they were corrupted, they began to lose that knowledge. I believe that man, was actually remembering their time as elves. It was at this point in the discussion that Finrod began to understand the depth of the change that had occurred in man. In Morgoth's Ring 357, he goes on to say, thus it was in fact Finrod who said that the disaster to men was appalling. Dreadful beyond all of the calamities was the change in their state, and that was on page 318. And his recognition that the power of Milkor was greater than had been previously understood comes much earlier in the debate. To change the doom of a whole people, of the children, to rob them of their inheritance, if he could do that in Eru's despite, then greater and more terrible is he, by far, than we had guessed. All right. At first, Finrod did not believe that the Morgoth could have such power. All right. That even Morgoth could thwart Eru's or God's designs. But remember one thing. One of the greatest gifts we have been given is free will. We have the choice to go with the plan or to change it if we want to. There's a wonderful story out by one of my favorite authors, Richard Bach. The book is called Illusions. And in the very beginning of the book, Richard Bach talks about a little tale of creatures that live in the bottom of the crystal stream. And they spend their entire lives holding on to this log at the bottom of the stream for fear that if they let go, the stream will crash them on the rocks and they die. And so generation after generation after generation, they hold on to this log because that's the only way they can live. And so generation after generation after generation has taught them fear or the illusion that death would occur if they just simply respond to their own inner callings. So generation after generation after generation, they live boring and mundane lives. And even today, you can hear this, the big popular saying, you live, you born, you die. Because they believe this is all there is to life. And there is so much more to life than hanging on to a log. Well, one day, as these creatures have been holding on to these logs generation after generation, one of them eventually says, I don't believe this. I don't believe that this is all that life is about. I believe that there is more to life and it's precious and it's a wonderful gift. And I should trust the current, that it's actually here taking care of us. Because does it not bring us food from upstream? All right. Well, the others started laughing at him and said, well, that's just crazy. The stream is evil and it will, if you give into it, it will crash you on the rocks. And remember, the Morgoth, in the very beginning, tried to make the elves afraid of the Valar, of Orome, saying, that's evil, don't go with them. And remember, that's how the Avari then went off running off into the forest, by being taught fear generation after generation. Well, this one little creature said, no, I'm not going to buy into that. I believe that the stream is here for us and is a giver of life. And I'm going to let go and I'm going to experience life. And they all started laughing at him, saying, oh, you're going to die, but we'll watch you. Let's see what happens. This will be great, but we're bored, so this will be great. So the little creature said, all right, I'm going to believe. And he let go of the log. And the stream took him and crashed him on the rocks, and he's bashing around and grabs hold of another little twig down there, and he's holding on for dear life, and he's all damaged and back on the log. They're just laughing at him, saying, "We told you, the stream is evil, and it's going to kill you. And so now you're stuck on this rock over here." And the little creature said, "No, I just didn't believe enough. I didn't hold in my heart enough to know that this could be. That my heart is telling me that there is more to life than what you're experiencing, and that this illusion that you're holding to is not real. And I believe that the stream will take care of me." And they're all laughing again. So he takes a big breath and he goes, "Okay, I'm going to believe. And he lets go. And this time, the stream didn't crash him on the rocks. It lifted him up, and off he floated away, leaving those behind just stunned, watching him float away on the little stream. Okay, so here he is, he's going down the stream, and he's enjoying. He's seeing things no one has ever seen before. He's experiencing life in all dimensions, so to speak, going up and down and learning to how to swim and to be in this creation. And he's experiencing so much of life now. Life is no longer mundane and boring and filled with fear. It's now exciting for him, because we are indeed the otters of the universe. So here he goes. We're almost done with this tale. He's floating down the stream, and far up ahead is another log of another colony of creatures who are doing the same thing as those behind him, just holding on for dear life because they can't believe that there's anything more out of this, holding on to the story that the stream is evil and that they will die if they let go. And so here he's floating up to them slowly, and they see him from afar. And they're going, "Oh my gosh, this is a miracle. This is a Messiah. Please teach us and stay with us and teach us in miracles." And he's floating up to them, and he says, "Just do what I do. Just let go. Just let go and trust the stream, that it will take care of you." And they're going, "No, please stay." And he floats on by, leaving behind the legend of a Messiah. All right, and so that's what's been happening with humans for thousands of years. They're still believing the stream is going to hurt them, and have chosen to believe the lie of what we're really not. All right, so back to a little bit more proof, and then we're done here. All right, so Tolkien reveals to us that the strength of his power was indeed immense, the Morgas, and could appear to twist even the original designs to a depth unexpected. But Finrod probably went too far in his assertion that Mildekor could not wholly corrupt any work of Eru, or that Eru would necessarily interfere to abrogate the corruption, or to end the being of his own creatures, because they had been corrupted and fallen into evil. It remains therefore terribly possible there was an elvish strain in the orcs. These may then even have been mated with beasts, sterile, and later with men. All right, their lifespan would be diminished, and dying, they would go to Mandos and be held in prison till the end. All right, so it proves that through corruption and fear, that one race, if you have enough people believing, can become corrupted and become another race. Man. All right. Okay, it's clear now from the passages found in the Legendarium, the Morgoth did indeed have the power to wholly corrupt an individual. Given enough time, a new branch can and did emerge. Even the Old Testament of the Hebrew and Christian traditions record of the fall of man, from a time when they lived in an immortal state of grace within a garden. I would wonder if the garden might have been Cuvanen. So here you even have the Christian and Jewish religion saying of a fall of man, meaning man had to be in a higher state to fall. All right, and that was exactly what Tolkien talked about. We are elves. We just have forgotten, and we've allowed the fear and the corruption and the illusion to help us forget who we are. Okay, I said there was going to be a little bit of hope at the end. Okay, so hope for the future, for the fate of man. Again, Tolkien perspective. Okay, as with the Bible and Revelations, hope for a healing of the races is also mentioned in the Legendarium. All right, again, very common. Most religions and spiritual beliefs have that there is a healing coming, that it can happen. All right. Okay, the elves often debated what would become of man, and their lore was steeped in prophecy on this matter. The fate of men was also later discussed by the Eldar, the elves, when they had met man and knew them, but they had little evidence and therefore did not know or assert, but supposed or guessed. Okay, one supposition was that elves and men would become one people. Even the earlier elves went, well, most likely eventually they would return back. Okay, and that was Morgas Ring, page 251. Again, the healing seems to be something offered to the races, but must be accepted by the individual. You have to decide what you believe in and what you're willing to accept into your life. And what you do starts in here and eventually comes out. Okay. The elves' prophecy is that one day they will fare forth from Tol Eressëa, from Valinor, and on arriving in the world will gather all their fading kindred who still live in the world and march towards Valinor. This they will only do with the help of men. This is the elves' prophecy. If men aid them, then the fairies will take men to Valinor, those that wish to go, and then fight a great battle with Melkor and Etermani, and then they will open up Valinor. Laurelin and Silparin, the two trees, will be rekindled. Alright. And the mountain will be destroyed, and then the soft radiance will spread over all the world, and the sun and moon will be recalled. That's from The Shaping of Middle-earth, page 58. Alright, so even the elves predict that one day they will come back from the Greenlands, and will come and find their kindred who stayed behind and are fading, and will take them home. But this can only be done with the help of man. And remember what I said in an early video. What help can man do? Well, the elves, in order to start this, will begin to rekindle the love of Arda, of life and man. And when we remember that love, it will come out, and we will remember who we are, and then we can all partake in the healing of the world. Okay, in summation, the elves have a special word for a unique kind of hope, and that is, the word is Estelle. It's my favorite word. It goes far beyond the normal meaning of hope. All right, in its essence, it means an ultimate belief that in the end, it will come through and will heal the world, and that life will go on. It is an ultimate, without any kind of restriction, the ultimate hope or trust in Eru. It will work out in the end. It will, and all we have to do is believe and be a part of it. All right. Okay. For myself, this feels somewhat how right for me. All right. The legendarium seems to be trying to tell us that at one time we were all truly one, and through our own weaknesses we allowed our true self to be led and be hidden to such a great degree as to appear as another people, unrelated to our brothers and sisters. So we could be this way for so long that we forget who we are and appear to truly be different from our other elven brothers and sisters. Within each of us is that original elf. All right, still looking out from Cuavanen with wonder in our eyes. All right, there has been occasions in the histories that point to a time when an individual, such as Luthien, okay, were able to make the choice, one between immortality and mortality. I believe the choice is within each one of us. We all have the choice to choose immortality or mortality. Immortality, the remembrance and believing in who we are, or mortality, where we choose a philosophy of death. Very simple. All right. Maybe no one could have said it better, and this was one of my favorite quotes, than Samwise when he was saying goodnight to his daughter one evening after storytelling. He had been talking to his daughter and telling her a story before bed, and they talked about mortality and mortality, and how Luthien had made the choice, and Arwen had made the choice to be mortal because they wanted to be with their mortal mates. And he said, maybe, said Sam, kissing her gently, and maybe not. The choice of Luthien and Arwen come to many, Eleanorel, or something like it, and it isn't wise to choose before the time. To choose before the time. It's up to us to choose whether we choose life, immortality, or we choose mortality, death. We choose to believe in you live, you're born, you die, or you choose to believe that life is so much greater than that, and choose to remember who we are inside. Okay, but as Samwise said, be careful to choose before our time. Live, learn, grow, be open-minded, and then you can find out who you really are, and in time you'll make that choice. Okay, so there you go. That's how I perceive that we are actually, truly, by nature, we are elves, but we have forgotten that. We have allowed ourselves to be sucked into the illusion of fear. So two sides of the coin, love and fear. You have to decide in the long haul which one that you will accept. All right, the more you accept the love side, the more you remember who you are, however you want to define that as elf or otherwise. But as I see it, we are by nature elven. We have simply forgotten and allowed ourselves to be fooled and deceived. Okay, so again, as I said earlier in the video, there's going to be a lot of people who will probably not agree with this, because it seems to specifically state in certain passages that elves and men are separate. But when you look into the writings of Tolkien, we can see that we are really of one race. We've just forgotten who we are. All right, and so that'll be it for today. What I'd like to do is, as I had mentioned before, I love giving a little saying at the end of each one of these videos, and one of my favorite groups to go by in their wisdom is the Silver Elves. You'll notice in the description that I always leave a link for them. They're two wonderful people, and I would love for you to read more of their books if you would like. The passage today is from this book, Elf Quotes. Absolutely love it. I have read this amongst probably most of their other books on those. So this is by the Silver Elves, and the saying is very apropos for what we talked about today. It is not so much that elves will come back to save the earth and humanity, so much as humanity must become more elven to save itself and the earth. Very apropos for what we're talking about today, and that's from the Silver Elves. Thank you very much for giving me permission to show these in this video. All right, so that's it for today. I hope this was inspiring to you and helped you out. Please do not hesitate by leaving comments and let me know how you feel, and any ideas, for future videos that you would like, please let me know. I would love to hear from you. And next week we'll get together again for another video. So until then, Namaste and peace to all.